Hello.
Hello.
Are you
Hi,
Dennis?
Yes, I am.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. Kendra.
You too.
Hi.
This is Trent.
Pretty modest, but we like it. And the thing we like most is our the deer come through, and the turkeys come through, and the bunnies live under the deck. And then
It's so close to the city, but so far
yeah.
in so many ways. That's why we love it.
Anyway, and some wildlife from Africa down there, and Dennis's office is tucked away up in this little loft.
Yeah, this is kind of where I spend my day when I'm in town. Yeah, and all my books.
I can show you this. I've got paintings upstairs and everywhere, but I just have to put them somewhere, so I jammed them in here. But that's two rhinos from Namibia. That's belongs to no one, which is the mother, and belongs to everyone, which is the baby. That's what they named them. The rhino guards did. And then zebras and egrets from Botswana. That's an older painting. And then Dennis's Bateman. Chatham, sorry, a Chatham print. It's just so nice here. I mean, we've got neighbors and everything, but our property, we got really lucky and have a swath of property that goes up to the top of the hill back there, and it's it's all going to be. We're going to put it in it's going in a conservation easement, hopefully here in a couple months, and so it'll always be kind of a little refuge for critters and stuff.
Yeah, we have deer, elk, and moose, and one mountain lion.
We have
bobcats.
Yeah. Often.
Very regular bobcats. And we seem to have more hawks this year than I've noticed. I don't know what's going on. I could ask Steve, but something's going on.
Mm-hmm. We used to have moose, but they don't come as often. They Harley's Canyon put up a drift fence or something to keep them off the road, or we don't know what quite happened, but they do come through once in a while.
We went to both Namibia and Botswana, and working in Africa had never been, quote, in the dream. But then once we got there, and particularly Botswana, it's just the multiplicity of this life everywhere, herds and herds of life, and then the people of Botswana, I thought I was in Jamaica. Hey man, how you doing? Just so friendly, and just so yeah. I've been back 51 times, and it completely changed my outlook of where I wanted to work. But yeah, it's we're putting together a pretty big effort right now, and we're probably 60 days away from knowing if it's going to trigger and we can move forward. But yeah, it's been working in Botswana, it's a very kind of classic of everywhere. There's all this wildlife. Number two way they make money in the country is tourism, because that tourism's coming to see that wildlife. But the money doesn't really trickle down or over to many of the local people. And Botswana's pretty well off compared to all of its neighbors because of diamonds and the tourism, as far as you just look at gross numbers. But it has the greatest divergent incomes of all of Southern Africa. You have the poorest and the wealthiest. There's abject poverty in the Okavango Delta. And there's people living with, it's the highest, Botswana has 50 to 60% of the remaining African elephants in the world. And the highest density of large predators. So lions and leopards and hyenas and wild dogs and then everything they eat is there. And the local people have to live with all that. So there's elephants in the garden. There's lions when you're trying to go get some water, and whatever else. And here, like neighbors here fussing about coyotes eating their cats or whatever, or deer eating their tulips. It doesn't quite equate to having an elephant, eat your family's garden that's supposed to last the whole year in one night. So early on we saw that there was a need, and then like so many other places, just conservation work in general, you have money for a little while, then you don't. It cycles around. You have, might have 3 years to get some work done. And then you're scrambling again to keep anything going. So local people don't really believe you that you're coming to help because you're going to disappear. Just like our situation with the USAID right now, and Trump trying to do what he's doing. It's just cutting things off. So a lot of the work I've done other places have been involved with setting up community-based trust funds. And communities receive money out of that fund to do different things that are good for their community and also good for wildlife. We can trace back to some of my first efforts there, which is primarily dealt with Native Americans in Canada and also here in the U.S. There's a collaboration now called the Enduring Earth, which is the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, and the Pew Charitable Trust. So 3 bingos, as we call them, big NGOs, bingos. You always have to be careful working with bingos, but but they do have resources, and they're also partnered with a thing called Zoolab, which is the Walton family. It's Walmart money, and they have an ambitious goal of doing 30 countrywide conservation plans with established conservation trust funds by the year 2030. And currently they're only working in countries where one of those 3 bingos are currently working or have offices. So we've been slowly convincing them, and also it helped that a friend of mine got hired by Pew anyway there are long established nonprofit organizations, non-government organizations in Botswana. They're mostly small, mostly started by husband and wife teams, mostly expats. There's the elephant folks, there's the hyena lady, there's the wild dog couple, there's the, on and on. And there's the lion guy, And so the idea is to get all of them to work together with all the different communities that they're working with, and to create a trust fund so that 10 years from now there'll be money there that'll last into perpetuity to keep this work going and to keep all the so we're also partnered with the paramount chief of the Botswana people and everything. So but we've just finished a feasibility study. It took several months, and then this morning we were talking about, so that will be presented to the government of Botswana the last week of March, and they of course have to prove us doing this, and which I really don't. We've done a lot of smaller meetings, of course, before then. Never have a meeting unless you know what the outcome's going to be. If you don't know it, then postpone it and have no. But yeah, we're pretty confident, but still, it's a bit of work to do before then. And it's a brand new government. The first piece of work we had to do to start this was called a viability assessment. Was Botswana viable to do one of these kind of long-term projects? And it mostly had to do with how stable the government was. Of course, now the joke is, who's calling who stable? So all these Botswana guys I'm talking to are saying, "Hey man, what's going on with you guys? You're not very stable." So, and you know, but yeah, so that's what we're hopeful. It'll be impact 70 million hectares. What's that? 100. I don't know. Multiply that times 2.47, and you get your acres. And probably 80 different communities, 21 different language groups. So yeah, it's a big deal. But I want to do, and I'm 71 years old. I want to do one more of these, and so this is it. You know, and so I think everything I've done over my career has really been kind of building to be able to do one of this kind of significance. I started, with the very first instance I was working for the New Mexico Game and Fish as a research assistant, and part of what we had to do during that time was the Pecos Wilderness, which is up above Santa Fe and the Santa de Cristos, has a bighorn sheep population, which is then had kind of overpopulated an area. They were all originally from Banff National Park because they had shot out all the sheep had been shot out of New Mexico. And when sheep are transplanted, they don't migrate very well from summer to winter range. Anyway, we went up there and we moved 21 of them out by horseback since it was a wilderness area. The horses weren't excited about that, and neither were the sheep. But we took them down to a place called the Manzano Mountains, which is south of Albuquerque, and released them up there. And right downslope from where we released them was the Isleta Pueblo lands of the Isleta Pueblo Indians. And about 3 weeks later, we got invited to a barbecue. The Isleta had killed a number of sheep and invited us to come for a meal. It was my first lesson in community-based conservation. Perhaps you should talk to the community before you do something in their area, in an area that they consider to be their lands. But anyway, that was, I always fall back on that one. But then I was at the University of Montana as a research assistant, also in graduate school. Working on grizzly bears. That's hence the grizzlies. And that was really so much of my focus. I didn't want to work anywhere unless there was bears around, and that's why Africa was kind of this. No bears. But and I had I'd worked all around, all north, south, east, west, and south of Glacier National Park. But on the east side is the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. And we knew grizzlies were being killed there, shot and trapped. And we wanted to figure out why, how, who. And so had to gain permission from the band council to work on their lands. So I went to 23 council meetings before I was allowed to speak. That was part of putting the white guy through the trenches. Let's see if he's serious about this. but he keeps coming back up. I'd be sitting in a meeting and they'd get down to the agenda where it said, in a University of Montana bear, kind of said, okay, time for the bear guy. Okay, meeting adjourned. Go away. But this old guy on the council, I noticed he slept through most of the meetings. And then they'd wake him up for votes. And usually, however George voted, everybody else would look down there, they would follow. So I recognized he was a bit important. His name is George Kicking Woman. And so I got kind of looking into George, and I found out he was a thunder bundle holder. On the Blackfeet Reservation with the Blackfeet people, that's kind of like a godfather. I mean, people would go to him for weddings, blessings if they were going to school, blessings if they had gotten drafted or going off in the service, whatever have you. And or if they were ill, they would come to him for healing ceremonies. Molly, his wife, was actually the owner of the bundle, as indeed was the tradition, and she gave George permission to utilize the bundle, to exercise the bundle. And Molly just always yelled at me and told me to do things like chop wood, skin the pig, whatever. But I started reading about the bundle and stuff and talking. I realized that the bear was part of the bundle. In the bottom of the bundle is just looks like a big leather bag, all wrapped up in different blankets and of different ages and different kind of stuff. But in that bundle was bear, pieces of bear, hide, claws, whatever. And what I was proposing to do, which was to trap by snare, drug, put a radio collar, an ear tag, yank a tooth to see how old they were, put a tattoo in their lip, was the most offensive thing that George thought a person could do to his totem. And I would always bring him gifts of elk meat, deer meat, grouse, rainbow trout, whatever. Belt buckles, hats. But with the meat, he'd always go, "It's not bear, is it?" I go, "No." He goes, "I don't eat bear." I go, "No, you told me that, George." "Well, you've eaten it." "Yes, George." Another involved story. I killed a bear when I was 17 with a bow and arrow by wrong place in the wrong place, wrong time. Something I've been trying to make amends for ever since. And George said, "Well, we have to work on that for you." But finally he agreed that I could work there and do some very limited trapping. Only if I would do an apology ceremony with George. So George taught me an apology ceremony. So when I had the bear down, I would mix some tobacco, blow smoke around them, take some sarvice berry and make a little offering to the bear. And at the end, take the bear's ear and say, "You know, George knows nothing about this." George was the first person that I walked with, through the bush where everything was alive. He talked to everything. And he would say stuff like, "Be still, the wind's going to find us. Be still." "Bear guy, did you hear that?" No, George, I didn't hear that. Ah, me either. And then, or, hey, did you hear that? No, you should have heard that. And, but then, that was where indeed I was, I really didn't accept the idea that there was any difference from different peoples with their relationship to the land. I felt like I had one. I had grown up in Wyoming and New Mexico and had gained some sense, but there's a difference. And all those people that have had that kind of long relationships still have something to teach us and have a right to carry that work on, carry their lives on, doing that kind of thing. And just supporting them to do that alone is good work. If you can also bring in a bunch of bears and salmon or whatever else too, then that's the add-on. But I went from there to the coast of British Columbia, a large initiative now that's called the Great Bear Rainforest, kind of the first really big conservation deal in the world, really, where there was, at one time, the clear-cut logging on the coast of British Columbia was greater than the Amazon, Indonesia, anywhere. And this was in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. And we got involved with a people there called the Heltsuk, and a little bitty village of Bella Bella. And their business council had wood. They were cutting wood. They were part of the clear cutting. They had contracts. Their hereditary chiefs had really been pushed aside of having any kind of basic power. And a long story there. It goes on. We ended up partnering with Greenpeace International, who organized a wood products boycott that shut down the logging on the coast, really. So all the companies came, and the government came to Greenpeace and said, what do we do to stop this? I said, well, you use a conservation plan where 30 million acres will be put into different levels of protection. And a small amount of land will be available for logging, but in a much different manner than what you've currently been doing. And they all said, hell no. But then, as the boycott went on, they were convinced. And there are 21 First Nations on the coast, all signed in as deals. Most of them put at least 50% of their territory into protection, into strict park-like protection. And they all got access to $120 million trust fund. And it's going quite well. But from there, I was introduced to, at one of the meetings, that Greenpeace had called for us to meet, and we were supposed to be we were going to go through a workshop of how to work with Indians, basically. And it was, and I noticed sitting there, it was this place where it was basically all vegetarian, beautiful place out on one of the islands out from Vancouver. And this one native woman I saw sitting over there was eating this pork chop about this thick. And I went over and go, where in the hell did you get that pork chop? And she said, well, here, let me find you one. She said, I told him I wasn't coming unless I had some meat. That was one named Joan Jack, and I got her people, the Taku River Tlingit, very northwestern corner of British Columbia. They're their territory alone is 10 million acres. There's about 350 of them, people left. Smallpox, residential school, everything else, suicide. But we were asked, Joan asked us to come up there and meet her people to see if we could work with them. And we were scheduled to go, and then the day before, we learned that one of the very influential young people, and also Joan's brother-in-law, Lester and Jack, had committed suicide. Shot himself with his own .30-06. And I was talking to Joan's husband, Brian. I said, Brian, then he was on the phone. I said, we probably shouldn't come, right? You guys need to grieve and have your... And Brian said, no, this is the perfect time to come. So when we went, he drove to Whitehorse, about 2.5 hours, from the little town of Atlin. It's in February. It's 35 below. And we drove down to his house where they were having, quote, a smoker. And it's part of the grieving process, part of the funeral kind of stuff. And it's where everybody gets in the same house and you smoke your brains out. You smoke. And it's and at this big basket, they're just handing around cigarettes. Of course, Trent and I go, we don't smoke. And I said, yes, we do tonight. But it was so smoky inside, you had to go outside to get some air. But then, but it was so damn cold out there, you couldn't breathe out there either. So we had to go back and forth. The Wolf Clan and the Crow Clan. So that mask back there is a Crow Clan mask hanging on the wall back there behind you. And so in order for us to be a part and partake in the proceedings, one of us had to be Crow and one had to be Wolf. So I went to the Crows and Trent went to the Wolves. That's her wolf mask out there. And we partook in all the different ceremonies. I had to build a big fire a big bonfire in order to thaw the ground enough to dig a grave. I had to sit with the body the whole time all this was going on. But we met everybody. Tlingit from North, all Tlingit came in. Lester was he was known as kind of the village comedian. He was just, I wish I'd ever met him, but he was just supposed to be a funny young man. And, but that was, we got to see how that worked, and then I was asked to come back and to meet with the leadership, and I was walking down the hallway in their offices, and this old woman came out and grabbed me and brought me in a little room, and there were 7 elders in there, all women. Antonio Jack was the matriarch. Then there was, Auntie Mary and everybody's aunt or uncle. And they said, we want to ask you some questions. I said, okay. They said, tell us about your mother. And I said, you mean Margie? I said, yes, Margie. What did Margie teach you? Anyway, they had this whole series of questions about my mom. And are we close now? Are we on? What did she teach me? What? On and on and on. And finally, they said, okay, you can go now. You can go meet with the leaders. I went out in the hall and quickly realized I just met with the leaders. So, I'd been blessed. So I went down there. Everything went fine with the leader, But that started what is now a 27-year engagement working with those people. We did achieve, a lot of their lands are now protected. Could be more here soon. We also helped them build a micro hydro plant, so all their power they have off their little micro hydro. They sell they sell the rest of it to the white folks. They get their power free. It's kind of good because it was reversed before, and a little smoked salmon business. But from there, introduced to some people in the Yukon North Slope, so the Beaufort Sea in the Arctic. Really people who just know everything in detail about their places. And they're struggling with climate change like no other place is. The winds are changing direction. They used to sail down the Mackenzie River in the Northwest Territories and then sail along the coastline to their hunting grounds in the Yukon, mostly porcupine caribou herd. But with climate, the winds are blowing the opposite direction now. They can't get there. And then everything's not freezing up enough in the winter for them to take their snowmobiles across all the different creeks and everything have to get there. So they're having to walk and sled and walk. And anyway, and if, as the saying goes, if your mucklucks get wet, you die. So that's where I was last week. Was up there at this conference they were having they were telling their story of how they achieved. So they now, the whole northern slope of the panhandle of the Yukon is now protected. We kind of filled in the last little 3 million acres. Helped with that. And they have this is 3 communities of about 1,500 people total. So we were able to put together a $22 million trust fund for them. Primarily, it's almost all earmarked for them to be able to take their children and families out there. So they build these summer camps, and they live on the land during the summer. And then in the winter, they can access some other areas too. That's where these sealskin gloves came from. But they're too small for me, so Trent got some new gloves. But it's such, you do so much of this work sometimes, and sincere thank yous sometimes are rare, but not there. It's just humbling to be around these people like that who they appreciate what you've done, and they recognize you come from such a different place, and you really don't understand where they come from. I was bitching and moaning about, I had a middle seat in the flight from Vancouver to Whitehorse, and the guy said, yeah, it took me 2.5 days by snowmobile to get down to Old Crow before I could come down. He said, but I know what you mean about those middle seats. At least on my snowmobile, I can stop and get off and walk around. I go, okay, I'll quit my bitching and moaning about my stupid little middle seat for 2.5 hours. Or Danny, Uncle Danny, talking about, I've got kinfolks over in Alaska. I go see them. It takes me about a month to walk over there. So I stay for a long weekend, and I walk back. This is a guy in his 60s, or 70s, just taking a little walk to see his cousins, and then there was another little place called Bears Ears, with the Navajo. that actually started with the foundation getting in touch with us about the biggest threat to Cedar Mesa was, or biggest threat to the archaeological ruins and everything else there, and also just the area, was Navajo people driving around willy-nilly collecting firewood. And as the old joke goes, you know, the BLM ranger pulling over the Navajo and saying, "I'm going to write you a ticket." And the Navajo fellow saying, "Oh, thank you." "And what are you thanking me for?" "I'm giving you a ticket. I have something to start my fire with now." But, you know, over 80% of the homes, the Navajo people in southern Utah and northern Arizona have no heat. They have no electricity. So they burn wood to cook. They also have special ceremonial woods that they collect as well for different kind of purposes. And I was asked by this fellow at the Packard Foundation, what would be a way to stop that? I said, well, only the Navajo can stop the Navajo. So, I know we started meeting with different Navajo people, and Obama, we knew, had said that he wanted to do something for Native people. So we started pitching first a national conservation area, then I got morphed to a national monument. But and our first meetings at the White House staff was that there have to be other tribes involved, which is interesting. So we started and said, particularly the Hopi. They said for something publicly and politically, everybody loves the Hopi. Everybody likes Hopis. I go, okay, I don't. And so we started talking to the Hopi, and indeed they still have active ceremonies on Cedar Mesa, Bears Ears. One just right out of town in Bluff, a place called Wolf Point. But this Hopi fellow told me, he said, "Do you know what our name for Navajo translates as?" And I said, "No." He said, "Those who bash our skulls on rocks." So we're not quite sure we want to work with it. Anyway, so it was interesting getting the Zuni and everybody else lined up for that one. But that's really the only in country. And then there was some work in Namibia that I mentioned before, in the Kunene, some different tribes there, but they've all kind of led to this Botswana gig going on, and this Botswana thing, really, we started it 8 years ago, and it's a little thing called COVID kind of slowed it down a little bit, but they take time, and they take time, but at the same time you have to be prepared for when an opportunity comes up. And like with this Enduring Earth, we already had so many things we'd already developed, so many relationships with government, so many relationships with communities. And really in Botswana, like particularly in Canada, we weren't too concerned about what the Canadian government thought, as long as we had the local people, the local First Nations, Indian people saying this is what's going to happen. They were the power brokers. And they had this strong voice. And in Botswana, it's very much the same way too. And so we spent those years getting to know a lot of local people, local Hoshis, that's what the chiefs, and different relationships between the different tribes there. Like the Sans Bushmen are still very much oppressed by everybody else, looking for a way to bring in their own lands as well. But and what's really important, I think, for young people who want to get into this work is knowing that it's messy. There's not like enduring Earth has a feasibility stage, it has a viability stage, a feasibility stage, a design stage, an implementation phase, all these different phases. Bullshit. They all they all mix. You might jump to this one, go back here. It's just, and yeah, and you have to be kind of prepared to, and just. I remember I wrote a paper a long time ago for somebody, a little essay, and I called it the Science of 1,000 Cups of Coffee. You know, because almost all these communities that I worked with, different people, they do things by consensus. And it takes a while to get to consensus. And in the meeting, when you're in a meeting, if somebody comes in and goes, "Come on, let's go have a smoke," you don't reply, "No, I don't smoke." Because he's just asked you to come out and have a very important conversation. So you go have your smoke and have your conversation. And realize that indeed it is about relationships. And with the there was a Healthsuck elder, Ed Martin, who told us that 3 years, if you come back on the third year, we'll start to take you seriously. And he was the first, and we spent a lot of time with Ed for his quote, traditional knowledge. We were one of the first people to ever, for any of the first groups to ever use traditional knowledge, and basically mixing it with Western science. But I remember Ed Martin, we were walking down the pier. Look at that. This is going to be a really hard winter. Very cold winter. I said, "Ed, how do you know?" He said, "Look at the size of that white guy's woodpile." He said, "He must have the Farmer's Almanac." And he'd chuckle. But yeah, it's I do. And I do cherish my moments hanging out with grizzlies, and I really like being in the presence of lions. I really like sleeping out when there's lions may come into your camp and walk around through. And as my very close friend Doug Peacock always said, it's nice to recognize you're part of the food chain sometimes. And I cherish those moments, but indeed I didn't begin thinking I would spend so much time with people. And actually have gained so much from them, just as much as I've gained from the bear or the lion or anybody else or anything else. So it's been a huge gift. I don't know. Indeed, well, yeah, I always liked wolves. Wolves is a perfect example of. There's a lot of wolves in that northern countries I've worked in, and also the wild dogs. Botswana, which are about that big, and the most efficient predator there is on Earth, as far as when their pack goes after something, they get it. 90% of the time. But with wolves, I always wondered if it's some kind of, like, we like good dogs, but these are bad dogs. You don't come here. They don't come to you. They won't do what you tell them to. I lived with a half wolf for 14 years. She never did that damn thing I tell her to. She saved my life a couple of times. But yeah, I don't know if that's, and then I think with bears, it is this fear. It is this kind of the, and almost all, a huge percentage is just, you run into them. You basically, you get between a cub and a mom. It's just natural protective instinct. I got knocked up in a tree by one. broke my arm and some ribs. Because I almost stepped on him. He was sleeping. I woke him up from a nap. He was a little grumpy. Um, but, and, you know, it, but once you kind of learn how to be around them, and take the necessary precautions. And sure, there are examples of predatory bears just coming in for one purpose only, is to eat you. They're very rare. The instances of predatory black bears is higher than grizzly bears. The polar bears are a little different in that if you're moving, they figure they could eat it. So polar bears are a little bit different to be around. And then what I was really surprised with lions was, and it's a cat thing. I mean, all cats are so similar. They're just cats. And but is like, we're always nervous in bear country about climbing in your tent and kind of stuff, and having a bear come over and just open it up, and say, "What's in here?" Lions if they can't see something about they can't see what it is, even though they can smell it and they know everything else. If they can't see, it's very, very, very rare they'll open that tent. So a lot of the stuff we do with livestock corrals, they're in Botswana they're called bomas, is we help the local community build these really heavy brush around the corrals, around the bomas, so the lion can't see. He can sure as hell hear the cattle or whatever's in there and smell them and everything else. They can't see, so he won't jump in. And it's just an easy little boing. They are cats, and but they won't. And I think because they rely so much on being healthy to hunt, they're not going to take that little chance. Trent and I were camped in the Kalahari, and we had been watching these 5 lions all day long. And that night they came in to say hi. And it was actually really early, but just right for dawn. And one of them came over and kind of laid on part of the tent, and another one peed on one side of the tent. You could hear their footfalls in the sand. And then they just roar, and Trent always gives me a hard time about, I usually go say, "Oh, honey, the lions are here." Then I'll go back to sleep. It should be fine. But yeah, they and yeah, if it's during the day, just kind of have to watch them. And if it's dusk time and they're starting to stretch and move around, no, you don't want to be out there walking around. It's just common sense. Or as the locals, we walk in, a guy we worked with named Mati. And Mati would say, "If the lion sees you, see him. He has to eat you. So pretend you don't see him." and then we were walking through this high grass, and he said, "If we see a leopard, just freeze and stare at the leopard. Just stare at the leopard." And so we're walking along, and all of a sudden Mati just comes running by us, just flying. Just, "Mati, what? And he goes, 'Leopard!'" Also, we're supposed to stay while you run off. But yeah, I don't. And to your question, again, I think it's that whole kind of let's quote this human wildlife conflict, which is in all the textbooks and references and everything else. How do you deal with people's fears? And people move up here for a reason, and then they don't want what's up here. It doesn't. I'm sorry that they were kind of here first, and it's don't plant tulips. Plant something else. Plant something they don't like. And we've had 30 deer right there in the front eating whatever. And every day they go by right there. It's just, I don't understand it. And coyotes are also just, is vilified. They just hate it. I don't understand. It's just a bad dog. We don't like bad dogs. I mean, I do. It's interesting, different animals. Like I don't. In Botswana, you've got to be most afraid of of buffalo, hippos, and crocodiles. Buffalo just seem to always have a bad disposition. They seem like they've always had a bad day. And they just look at you like, I'm having a bad day and I'm going to run you off. And we had a couple of friends that were severely stomped on. But, you know, and hippos, if you're in the water with them, yeah, they just knock you around. And at night they go out to graze, and you learn not to pitch your tent on a hippo trail. Like one of those obvious things you would think. And crocodiles, I just don't, as far as just, there is an innate fear of great big reptiles. I think we get that from somewhere. Because it's, you know, like a bear, I've had several bluff, you know, where they've charged several times, you know, many different situations. You can talk to a bear. But I don't know how to talk to a croc. They just don't. I don't. You can say, "Hey, bear, what are you doing, big?" And again, as Peacock always said, doesn't matter what you say, just talk to them. And don't yell, you know, and don't talk baby talk. But you know, but a croc, I don't know what to say. I just stay away. Randall was on the board of the organization I ran for 35 years. We asked Randall. So it was kind of a reciprocal relationship. And yeah, and I saw, one of the first times I met with Randall and Will and some of the others that were just kind of putting together, Randall said, you know, we come up with a new phrase, you know, and it's called ecological literacy. We have to get people to be more ecologically literate. And I said, Randall, I think David Orr came up with that about 30 years ago, but you can use it, but you might want to quote David, you know. And Randall was just so, didn't have a clue, really, you know, but was just so, he had to. It was just something he just had to do because of, really, from one little walk through that little rainforest down there. And just the power of what nature can do to anybody. I mean, that was with Randall. He's been on fire ever since, you know, and it's grown and grown and grown. And he's had such a, I don't know how he does it. Like he calls up Jane Goodall and all of a sudden she's on the board. It's like, how did you get Jane Goodall on the phone in the first place? You know, Desmond Tutu, really? You know, and all, and just his really unorthodox way of doing. It's really been interesting to watch how the organization has approached things in a very, very unorthodox manner compared to most, and but having great success. Really, I mean, Randall's he's right in the middle of the climate issue and talks and what to do, and then taking that all the way down to GMO use in Mexico. I mean, just he's kind of all and yeah, it's been real fun to watch. And right now, I'm actually trying to work with his son Stephen, you know, and I'll be trying to get Stephen to Botswana later this year to help with some stuff, you know. So yeah, it was Trent. She leads me a lot of places. You know, that's good for me. So that's how that started. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I've always thought a lot about where does that. I mean, some people are just innately enamored with the wild world. Just, I don't know if it's because there's a higher level of, you know, of Neanderthal genes, or you know, you still have your wisdom teeth. I don't know, but a bigger jaw and a sloping forehead. But but some people, I mean, it doesn't matter where they come from. They're just or where they grew up. One of my closest friends, who's probably one of the best field people I've ever been around, naturalist and everything else, grew up in Brooklyn, you know, and as he likes to say, he was in they put him in special ed when he was younger, so he went to the zoo a lot. I'm going to the zoo today, you know, and you know, he's just, but you know, I always call him the urban coyote because he's just so, he runs around the Bronx just like he does in New Guinea, you know, same kind of abandon. But you know, I think what I mentioned before, it also is just with getting it. There's naturally and a welcome approach to make the field of conservation a professional career. Quote, you know, getting the necessary degrees and training and all that kind of thing. But it's not pigeon. It's complicated. I mean, it's messy. You got to come at it from so many different ways, you really got to be prepared just to listen and take it as it goes, and really take advantage of opportunities, and not just say it has to happen this way. I think that's a critical lesson to learn, and listen to the people that are out there. I think in conservation all over the world, like internationally, you know, I've enjoyed some success. The people I work with have enjoyed some success. But not with our own neighbors. Not with ranchers in Wyoming, or sheep herders in Southern California, or Southern Utah. That's more difficult for some reason. We're more polarized. When you walk in a room in Botswana, there's not the fours sitting over there and the against sitting over here. Everybody's just sitting, you know, and everybody wants to know what's going on and have questions. Here you walk in there and the room's set. The table's been set. And people think they're against things or for things when they don't really know what the things are.
Oh, I'm this.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. I've been asked the question here: are you one of those fucking environmentalists? And yes, and I can be your worst nightmare. If you want to go that way, we can do that. You know, but yes, I would like to see that if we could somehow, you know, get serious about doing community-based conservation in our own country, our own people. You can't get any funding the rest of the world unless it is community-based. It's gone that far. It's completely flip-flopped. When I first started working on the British Columbia coast, I met with a foundation. Well, it was his money and his foundation, but he said, "You want to waste your time and my money working with Indians? You know, now if you're not working with the Indians in British Columbia, you can't get any money. You know, so it's completely flip-flopped. You know,
for the good.
yeah, and it you know, I mean the pendulum's over now. Next, it needs to kind of swing back in the middle a bit, but you know, I don't know. But you have to be optimistic if you're going to do this work at all. Because if you're not, you have to shoot yourself. So you don't have much choice. And you can become so cynical so easily. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to work with young people so much is because that cynicism isn't there, and the enthusiasm and the want to is. For conservation to exceed, we need to turn over. That new generations need to take on, because you have more to lose. We've already benefited. You have the most to lose. But I think indeed if it's again, I have to go back to one of the elders up in the North Slope. She was talking about that they have to learn to adapt, and they have to be willing to make changes in their own lives, and that they have to, quote, help the animals adapt. And she said they have helped us for millennia. It's our turn now to somehow help them adapt and give them a little space to adapt. And if we're going to have any wild world to deal with, we're going to have to do that. And I think it's accommodating others. And I think, I mean, so much in our own politics right now, we're separating rather than coming together. But and I don't know what kind of catastrophic event has to happen before we actually work together. How bad it has to get before we work together. But I think that, and I think there can be places that'll thrive, but there'll be places that won't. And there'll be suffering in those places that won't. But indeed, hopefully there'll be enough places to move to. Every little bit we can set aside is important, just for that reason, just to be able to have a little space to adapt. So the efforts of we're looking at putting 16 acres into a land trust. It all helps. And I don't. I applaud everybody from the Pax Naturas to everyone working. Just little incrementals here and there are going to add up and be ultimately what perhaps saves us and others. One of my favorite writers is Paul Shepard. His book, The Others, is a real, he was writing in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and really, but it's really about making room for others. Whether that other is a coyote or a Republican. I'd rather have the coyote right now, but yeah, I think that's, and I really hope Pax can find a way to continue, and how it's going to, after Randall, where is the succession there? And, and I think, we're not getting any younger, him or me, and, oh yeah.